Invite Professor Penny Jane Burke to be joined by Kaya Handley in a Q&A. And for the next 25 minutes or so, Kaya will guide a continuation of this really important conversation.
Now we get to go deep, right? And personal. No, I think... Oh, is it
on? Yes.
Yes, perfect, perfect. Now we get to learn a little bit more about you. We've just learned about your work. We were surrounded by musical instruments being in the conservatorium out the back, and we did have a bit of a joke about singing this section. So take it away, Penny Jane.
You do not want that to happen, let me tell you.
Right, no, okay, that's right. Dance is the forte, right?
Definitely.
Will you tell us a little bit about that? Will you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey to being here and, doing this incredible work?
Well, I suppose ballet has always been in the background for me, the absolute love of ballet. But it took me on an interesting journey, I suppose, to get to where I am. So I started off being a little girl, like lots of little girls, absolutely in love with the idea of being a ballerina. And I poured myself into this. And I was incredibly fortunate that, and I don't have time to tell this beautiful story, but at the age of 11, I had the opportunity to audition for the Royal Ballet School. I grew up in Los Angeles, so that was a bit odd, but that's another story. But they happened to be touring in Los Angeles, and they accepted me to the Royal Ballet School on the spot to come when I was 16. So I spent from the age of 11, I poured myself into this dream of becoming a student at the Royal Ballet School. And when the time came to leaving for England, for London, I left school early in preparation. So I took the high school equivalency test. I was just under 16 when I left school. And it was after that I did that unfortunately my parents told me that they couldn't afford to send me to the Royal Ballet School. So I ended up in a very precarious situation. All of my friends were in education, and I was working in low-paid jobs in stores and auditioning, trying to compete against 20-something-year-olds, and I was this tiny little 16-year-old. And my parents actually relocated to the Central Coast. All of this time, as I went through all of this, I became increasingly aware that my life was kind of headed nowhere, and feeling desperate is probably the word. And I was desperate to find my way back into the educational system. And you would think in California I would have been able to do that, but I didn't have a family who was able to support me with that. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find anybody to advise me. So I could not find my way back into the educational system. I was very, very vulnerable. And I ended up saving up $50 to take a Psychology 101 class at the local community college. And when I went into the class, a very handsome, charming young man sat next to me, and he became my husband. He very quickly took control over my life. We were both 19 at the time, and I became embroiled in a very dramatic and very extreme experience of domestic violence. I was isolated, I fell pregnant, and I was brought over to Europe, and we finally settled, if you can call it that, in London. And I won't go into all of the details because it's the making of a memoir, which I'm hoping to be able to do one day when I have some time. But my son and I became prisoners of the house. And so I ended up very, very fortunately on one day that my husband fell into a deep kind of state of mental breakdown at Heathrow Airport, and I screamed out for help. And I was very lucky that a senior officer came and helped me. I had actually called the police 3 times before this, but they didn't help me. In fact, it put me in a more vulnerable situation. So anyway, they told me about Women's Aid. I had no idea that Women's Aid existed. And I spent the next year with my baby, my beautiful son, who's now coming up to 35 years old. Um, at the time, he was 16 months old, and we lived in various women's refuges. We had to keep moving because we were in a lot of danger. And eventually, I remarried a beautiful, loving man, and during this period I was in the women's refuge is very important actually in sort of the unfolding of the work that I'm doing now, because again, it's all very serendipitous, but I happened to meet this incredible young woman, Esme, who was working in the refuge, and she literally navigated all of the unwieldy systems that I had to navigate to, apply for housing, to apply for legal aid, just to be able to move forward in the first steps, the first baby steps, but they were very important baby steps, to be able to get stabilized. And I stayed in touch with Esme for a long time, and completely serendipitously again, I happened to be at a mother and toddler group, and one of the women said, "Have you heard of access to higher education?" And I hadn't heard of access to higher education. So I went along, and I was absolutely thrilled. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how I felt, but I can still feel it, the excitement of discovering this program. And access to higher education at this time, I'm talking the early 90s, was very radical in its kind of ideas about the transformational nature of higher education, the possibilities of that. So I was part of that at a very important moment in time. I think it was kind of like a social movement. So that really, I think that really shaped my thinking about education. Very, very similar to our fantastic Open Foundation enabling program at the University of Newcastle, established around the same kind of period of time, still going strong in the 90s in the UK. Thank goodness, Open Foundation is still going strong here in Newcastle and helping so many people in our community. I guess that, there's a few really important points that come out of this story. And one is everything was serendipitous for me. And two is that suddenly I had people kind of coming forward and helping me navigate various systems. Towards the end of my degree, because I was just so amazed at the other mature, especially the mature women students I met. And I realized that they had, gained access to higher education completely against the odds. They all had incredible stories to tell. And I became really passionate about being an advocate for women's access to higher education. So I ended up doing my honors degree in women's access to higher education. And completely by chance, Esme and her boyfriend, who was a PhD student at this time, she said to him, "Would you look at Penny's work, just give her some feedback?" And he did, and he looked at my draft dissertation, and he said, "Penny, this is amazing work. You have really something to say here. I suggest you do a master's course." And I said, "What is a master's course?" I had no idea about the educational system at all. So I ended up doing a master's program in women's studies and education, and I met my soon-to-become PhD supervisor who encouraged me to do a PhD. So all of these things were completely serendipitous. And it was strangers, people I didn't know well, who came forward and helped navigate these unwieldy systems. I ended up getting an ESRC studentship to support my PhD because I had these incredible people who not only helped me with the system, but also recognized that I could do this. And I think, all the time, and up until now, I still have this internalized sense of unworthiness that comes from these experiences, these deeply embedded experiences of, feeling that you're never good enough, you're never good enough. So having people come forward saying, "You are good enough, I think you can do this, I recognize you, and I think you should do this," is so important. It's so valuable.
But you still have to, like, I feel like it's very easy for women, especially, to downplay it, especially women with trauma. You still have to be willing to walk through that door that's opened.
That's
So you
true.
need to give yourself maybe just a wee bit more credit to, being open to what people were saying through those moments and to walk through that door, because, that's not always an easy thing for us to do, to put ourselves out there, to follow someone a little bit blindly when we don't have the knowledge. So we're just going to change that language a little bit and add a little bit more like self-worth through there,
But
I think.
what I will say is that the students that I have had the honor to interview and my team have interviewed have also been willing to walk through that door, have incredible tenacity. But I don't think that they should have to cling by their fingertips, their fingernails, whatever the expression is, to be able to continue to pursue their dreams for themselves, their families, but also for making a difference to their communities. We need to put these kinds of mechanisms in a structured way so that it's not serendipitous. It shouldn't just be serendipity. It should actually be there for people to be able to progress their lives.
You talked about community and belonging on, in higher education a bit tonight. And you and I were talking earlier in the week about our uni experiences. And I was like, look, I didn't party and I worked full time and I went to the late classes and I didn't feel a lot of community through uni from my own experience. How do we need to bring that community and belonging out of the bar, potentially? It's good there too, but out of the bar and into coursework, classes, curriculum?
Well, I don't think that we should ever believe that students don't deeply care about their learning, because they do. I think that, we sometimes we project narratives onto students, or we project the ideas that we are kind of circulating around what the purpose of higher education is, and our students pick those up, but students deeply care about their learning. And I think particularly students who have experienced what I call multidimensional injustices, they really care about their learning, they really care about their higher education, but they often feel that they don't belong for the reasons that we've spoken about. And so I think that there are multiple things that we can do. And part of that is about thinking about the way that we teach and the way that we develop curriculum, and that we need to make the space for these knowledges and these experiences to be valued in those spaces. And that is how we build connection. Of course, the social side of university is also really important for many students. I had an experience kind of similar to you. I was raising my children while I did all of my degrees, and I just got to class. And,
Get it done.
Yeah, in and out.
Yeah.
And I didn't have time to
Take that high
socialize.
distinction, honey.
But
Yes.
I know that there are, that's a really important part of university life as well. So that's really important. Those aspects are also thought through, and we think about the spaces that we provide. But one of the things that CHE has done is we've created a really intimate space that we've co-designed with our students, which is right next door to our offices. So the students have put in bean bags, and they've put in their artwork that they've developed with our fantastic arts-based programs that are led by our CHE team, not by me, because I'm not an artist. They also have snacks in there, and those are kind of the pragmatic things that actually make a difference to them feeling in a safe space where they belong. It's a very, very nice, cozy space, but they also have the CHE team right next door. So if they have a problem with their coursework or an assessment, they can pop right next door and they can have immediate access to support from somebody who knows them, not to somebody that is unfamiliar, somebody who knows who they are and why they're there. So I think those kinds of things can make a real difference.
I'm interested in your thoughts on language and labels as well. Higher education, can be quite structured, which can maybe take that human element out of it. When we are sharing trauma, when we're asking for help, it's often telling the same story over and over again as well. How do we humanize higher education so that when we're in that moment, when we do need a little bit of help, when we are feeling that self-doubt, we are able to actually reach out, have those conversations, and not feel like we're getting, you know, like a certain coloured flag put above our heads, and that we carry that with us everywhere we go for the rest of our, you know, journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things I'm not advocating for is disclosure. So, you know, I am speaking here about my experiences. I'm in a very stable position. I can speak from a platform around those experiences. It's risky and it's difficult. So I am not suggesting that this is all about students coming out and saying, this is my experience of this. But what I am saying is that the knowledge that students can bring, the experience that students can bring, can actually help universities to figure these things out. We need to listen, and we need to listen to what their advice is, not their experiences, their advice, you know, about what we can do differently. And now I've forgotten the question. What was the bigger part of your question?
Yeah, look, I don't know. Something about labels, language, humanising higher education as well, so that it's not that stigma that's carried, even if they can just see it, I guess. So, you know, taking that label out of it of like, you're living with this, you're a person who is living with this throughout their course.
Yes, so I think it's about the way that we, you know, everything should not be standardized. So what I'm saying should never be a cookie cutter thing, that this is going to work for every student in every university. I don't think part of it is understanding the context of somebody's life. Now, to understand the context of somebody's life, you have to get to know them. So I think that we need equity frameworks that enable those relationships those kind of authentic relationships to be developed with students. So, you know, one of the things that we do is we developed a role that we call the relational navigator. And instead of the student going somewhere else where they have to seek advice from somebody they don't know, they have somebody who is walking alongside them throughout their whole journey, maybe before they've even come into the university, so that they don't have to disclose numerous times, so that they can have the support in the context of their lives with somebody they know, to be able to navigate those different systems that we know in universities and other parts of our social policy systems are often difficult. I even find them difficult sometimes. So,
I was about to say, do they come? Can we all get one of those?
oh, well, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to put in an order.
Definitely.
You mentioned as well, you know, Newcastle being in a really great position to lead this conversation. If we look at our communities here across the Central Coast, across Newcastle, across the wider Hunter region, if we get this right on campus at the UON, how does it bleed into the rest of our communities as our students and our teachers and our support staff go out and, you know, live their lives within our communities as well?
Well, I think it builds a sense of connection with the university. So, you know, I think we have to be very careful when we do community outreach that is a one-off or that is framed by kind of a marketing approach of student recruitment, because community members are very, very, you know, they're very sensitive. They understand these things, and that is just going to alienate people. So I think, you know, having these genuine relationships with our students and through them with their families and communities means that we build stronger connections, and those are sustainable. They're actually long-lasting because they're built on trust. Now that takes time. I recognize that takes time, but I think that it is time that we really need to put in, because I think it's mutually beneficial.
I want to come back to your UNESCO work, because I know it's not something that you do alone. You know, you've mentioned a lot of your teams, but there was a PhD student in Ghana. Is that?
Yes.
Will you tell us the story?
So one of the partnerships is with Ghana. You know, that's a big partnership that worked with colleagues in Ghana, and that really emerged from again, you know, the depth of the relationship, the care that comes when your pedagogical relationship is kind of embedded in ethics of care. So I met Gifty Gayamera when she came to Roehampton University in London to study with me in 2009. She did her PhD looking at internationalization in higher education in Ghana, and the impact of that on African indigenous knowledges and the way that African indigenous knowledges were being marginalized by these internationalization agendas that were very much framed by the West and particularly the US. So she was looking at how higher education leaders were shaping those agendas, and it was having an impact on African indigenous knowledges. But through her studies, and I kept saying to her, it's also about gender, it's about gender. Through her studies, she really became sensitized and aware that gender was such a huge issue in higher education in Ghana. She realized that there were hardly any senior leaders who were women in higher education in Ghana, and she found it incredibly hard as a woman to gain access to interviewing male senior leaders because of their discriminatory attitudes towards her as a woman. She did it. She worked really hard and she did it. But when she finished in 2013, she said, Penny, we have to do something. Like, how can you help me to do something about the situation in Ghana, Ghanaian higher education? So we worked together to co-develop a series of workshops that were about bringing women together to think critically about their situation and to kind of build that collective energy. We call it kind of, it's kind of co-mentoring, but it's not your conventional mentoring. It's a community of praxis that we've developed over time, and it has had support from the University of Newcastle, and our Ghanaian colleagues are very, very grateful for that. But we'll continue to work closely together under the UNESCO chair. So we've had many women now over the years participating in this program, and with different women in Australia, and it's been fantastic. But gender-based violence has emerged and re-emerged as one of the key issues. So we will be developing a parallel project with our colleagues in Ghana around the gender-based violence and the impact on higher education.
When you see something grow from like a tiny seed like that into what it is now, and being able to sit here on the stage and tell us about it on, the other side of the world, what are the emotions around that as you get to watch other women in particular thrive, young women thrive?
It's fantastic to be part of that. I think this is where, we really need to rethink the way that we imagine what success is in higher education, because we always center it on an individual person and on their career success. And, for me, the reward is actually, that kind of constellation of impact I talked about, that the impact happens outwards. And sometimes you don't even know it. Sometimes people tell me about these things years later and I wasn't even aware. Or it may be somebody that I taught and, they've actually passed that on to other people. So it's an incredible feeling and very rewarding. And that's where collaboration is so much more powerful, especially when we're talking about these kinds of issues around equity and social justice.
That feeling that you felt walking into Access Education Open Foundations for the first time, do you still get that when you walk into campus?
Do I get that when sometimes I do. I think in particular when I feel connected to students, I think that's when it really hits me hard, that feeling of what we're doing and, the energy that you get from that relationship. And I think most people who work in higher education feel that way. I think that there's a lot of incredible commitment, and people are working with incredible pressures on them. And this is where we need to rethink our kind of systems and frameworks to enable people who are educators. Their first love is educating, and to support them in that process, because that's what they're there to do. That's what they love to do. And the pressures around them are not helpful. And that also kind of, it pushes away the time and the care that can be put into more equitable relationships with teachers and learners. So it has knock-on effects as well.
What keeps you going on the hard days, on the days? I know you don't like the word barrier, but I mean, I don't have my thesaurus. But what keeps you going when you do hit those days that maybe there's, a little bit more below the line thinking than above the line positivity that, we all have and find and push through?
Well, chocolate helps.
Yes. What type? Tell me more. Let's get
Chocolate
right to the depth of your soul.
Chocolate definitely helps. Sometimes watching ballet helps me.
Yeah.
No, but I think, often I do a lot of overseas work, and so it's quite late when I meet with people, and I think, oh my God, I've had such a long day and I'm so tired. And then I have these incredible conversations, and the energy just comes right back up. It's just, I think it's people, it's the connections with people, and people who care, people who are in education because they really care to make a difference, and that's what keeps my energy going. Is those connections, and just having other colleagues and peers who are in it with me. And I think that's what makes the energy keep going. My CHE team is, I shouldn't say my CHE team, the CHE team is absolutely incredible, and they keep my energy going because of the dedication and commitment that they put into their work, and that is incredibly inspiring. We've got an incredible team of people who are just bringing in all sorts of different expertise, and it is truly a hub because we don't have a very conventional center where it's a group of academics working on research. We're working together across all of these different domains of knowledge and expertise, and that keeps my energy going.
Yeah. Beautiful. How about questions from the audience?
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, I'd love you to.
I also need to say that my beautiful husband keeps me going.
Tick that off, because he buys the chocolate.
He buys the chocolate.
Sick.
He definitely buys. And I also have to say my beautiful, beautiful sons and my beautiful grandson and my beautiful granddaughter keep me going.
Perfect. Please,
Yep.
take